So Pierre, a natural place to start, I think right before we're recording, we're talking about startups. So
Mhm.
I'd love to hear you rant a little bit about how you got interested in the world of startups. Was it at an early age? Has it been a recent phenomenon in terms of how it's piqued your interest?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of a funny story. My entire career, the more serious part of my career anyway, probably got kickstarted by a startup weekend event. Right, so it was way back in my early career. I was working for this web development agency, Axial Development, just to name drop them, and they ended up sponsoring this event. I had never heard about such an event, all about startups. I decided to participate just for the heck of it, and the team I was with ended up winning. And this kind of made me open my eyes as to everybody can become an entrepreneur. And before that, in my mind, entrepreneurship was this unattainable thing. I come from a small village, small village, Magog, whatever that means. And entrepreneurship was always kind of this alien concept to me. And suddenly, I was opening my eyes to the fact that this was something that everybody could do, and it was within my reach. And it tickled the ambitious part of my brain quite a bit. So I started getting involved with those events over the years. I started coaching startups. I started mentoring, being a judge at events, really, really involving myself in the community. And eventually, when I finally got some capital of my own that I could actually start looking into investing into businesses, I had the luck of already having this tremendous network. This network of people I helped throughout the years or that I knew. Um, we're building amazing products that were a little bit off the map still, and I could get in early, help them. And at the end of the day, it's not a capital gain game for me. It's really more a matter of kind of getting a seat at the table and contributing and living the experience of building a business without necessarily being there on the day to day. So it's kind of just taking the goods and very, very little of the bad and helping wherever I can. And yeah, it's at the end of the day, I guess it's kind of selfish, but I really get my kick out of helping those entrepreneurs that I work with.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point, right? Like this, there's that no one gives you permission, right? Like no one says, okay, here's your right to participate in this world. You kind of just
Mhm.
have to like start playing in the space and trying to help. And like you said, even it could lead you to like cool things like investing. What would you have as advice for maybe your younger self looking to break into the startup world, the entrepreneurship world? Like what are some myths that you would like to bust?
So the first thing that comes to mind is, put yourself out there. Like get interested because this is the kind of thing that requires, I think, some amount of work and some amount of networking. So it's very difficult to really break through this entire universe of startups and entrepreneurship without actually going out there and seeing what's being done. Like you could have a great idea and work on it in your basement and try to build something out of there. But the truth is, without being exposed to the ecosystem and without seeing the dynamics at play, it's very likely that your whatever business you build, even if the product is in theory very sound, it's unlikely that you'll get super far with it because you need to understand the dynamics at play, right? And also the community itself is so healthy, so giving, right? So helping. Um, it's important, I think, to get involved in that community because you get so much out of it that when it comes time to build a business, well, there are people there to help you, to guide you, to help you avoid those pitfalls that every single person will fall into if they're not given a heads up ahead of time. And even then, a lot of people still fall into them. But like that's a general idea, right? Like you got to put yourself out there. Like this myth of oh, they built Google in a garage. Well, yeah, but there's a lot of other factors that come into play when it comes to building a successful company. Like you might be able to build your product, but a business is so much more than a product.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really good points, Pierre. Like to just to riff on a little bit, like you said, if you're building a product, well, you need to understand the people part, right? So you need to get help,
Mhm.
understand how products are made. So if you're a technical founder, well, then understanding the more macro environment, getting help, building relationships. Like the people piece is important. And going back to what you said about investing, I find like I'm not a great capital markets investor. I want to say I'm a great angel investor, but I've done a few, pretty good deals as a result. And I find it's almost like unfair. Like it's so much fun to invest in startups. Like
Yeah.
you said you get the good without the bad. You're like you're not there the day to day when which is hitting the fan as it always does. But it's almost more rewarding than investing in some S&P index. Of course, it comes with a risk profile associated with it. But I find, yeah, it's much more fun, right? So maybe any lessons on the investing side that you've learned since you've done a few deals yourself?
Um, the first thing that comes to mind is you have to understand your tolerance for risk, right? So don't invest money you're not comfortable losing, and that will make your entire experience when it comes to investing so much more rewarding. In my case, I very honestly, and like I'm not saying that for show, I very honestly do not care about the money I'm investing. At the end of the day, I'm only putting that money on the table as a token of, hey, I believe in you guys and I really want to help you. And this is kind of a way for me to put some skin in the game and show you that I'm dedicated. I'm dedicated at helping you and seeing you find success, right? Like I just use this as a symbol at the end of the day, that allows me to get involved in a little bit more of a credible capacity, I guess. But yeah, like if you're going to be investing, it's important that you find entrepreneurs that you really vibe well with, right? Like people that are brilliant, shining, like that are awesome. Because investing in a business is is hardly dissociable from investing in the people that run it, right? So don't necessarily look for the product as much as look for the group of people that you know are able to build great things, because those guys are going to find success regardless of product market fit, right? Like they will get somewhere with this. And that's kind of my philosophy when it comes to investing, right? Like I find those businesses that I think have a founding team or a leadership group that are inspiring, and I try to put my money where my mouth is, and get behind them.
Yeah, I think the rule I use on this really good point you bring up is just like invest with people you would want to go have a beer with after, right? Like
Absolutely,
that you can hang around
absolutely. And the other thing is, if by using this philosophy of, what, I don't really care about the money, and again, I know this is quite unorthodox for investors, but in my case anyway, that's what it is. By having this philosophy, even if the business doesn't go as well, I don't have this personal pressure or stress that, hey, I'm going to be losing my investment here. I mostly just care about, hey, what can we do? Like, can I help you somehow? Can we do something? Like, it remains very positive as opposed to falling into the negative emotion zone.
Yeah, yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good insights, Pierre. And so let's maybe talk about your current like interest, right? Which is enterprise software, right? So more generally, because you've been in a bunch of different fields and interests. So what piqued your interest to get into enterprise software?
Well, yeah. So to be a little bit clearer, what we're all about is data. And we deal with large enterprises, even smaller businesses, but at the end of the day, we're all about data. And what brought me there, honestly, is it's kind of a culmination of everything I've done in my career up to now, right? I've always been very invested in the cloud space, ever for years now. Even as early as I think the first programming job in my career, I had the chance of being exposed to the the early stage AWS, and I started working with it, and I had the chance of kind of growing alongside the platform to a point where eventually I wanted to make that into my career, right? So I was looking at launching my own firm. Ended up, again, by sheer luck, being introduced to the CEO of what was at the time the largest AWS cloud consulting firm in Canada. I launched their Montreal branch for them. We had a lot of success. And long story short, where this led me is basically at that point where, okay, I've done cloud, and cloud is becoming ubiquitous in the market. What is the next thing that we can do from here to keep helping the same user base, the same market segment, and bring them to the next level? And really the the one factor we found was data, because those all of those organizations that were kind of migrating to the cloud and understanding this new operating model were first doing that with their infrastructure, which is arguably more complex but also easier to comprehend and easier to master in the cloud space. But then they were all facing the same problem, which was that data, when brought to the cloud, becomes I would say somewhat unwieldy, because moving data around in the cloud is really what's very expensive. So you have to make those decisions fairly early on in your cloud adoption journey, and sometimes those decisions kind of come back to bite you in terms of cost, in terms of value that you're not exactly recognizing. And like a question I really like to ask people, and I will ask it to you, Nectar. Why do we care about data?
Oh boy. Because I find, honestly, I don't know if it's the right question, because I think most people just don't understand what data means, right? So
Mhm.
by itself, it's like I would ask you, is like, what do you mean by data? Like that'd be my question back to you, right? Because I find and this is maybe my subsequent, and I'll try to get to I'll realize your question, but like the subsequent question is like, what do we mean by cloud? Like, what do we mean exactly by data? It becomes this kind of like rabbit hole of trying to understand, okay, what is the company really trying to do? So, and so you see some companies like contort themselves to have, okay, we need a hybrid cloud. I'm like, but why exactly hybrid, right? So it's like it leads you to all these different kinds of questions. For myself, what I found out about data is that as the world gets more connected, it just creates many more endpoints. And I think those are the endpoints that I find interesting, right? So you can do new things, new use cases, be it on the consumer or on the business side, that you weren't able to do before. So the starting point is, of course, the data piece, right? But it's the where you want to get to is where I find more interesting than the initial question.
Absolutely. So that's super good insight. And basically, you kind of avoided the typical pitfall that people fall into when they answer this question, which is, oh well, data is valuable because, well, we can do things with it and we can generate value out of it, right? That's generally what comes out of this question. But your insight is very good in the sense that data in and of itself is essentially worthless, right? What is data fundamentally? Data is just a data point, right? It's just a 17 or, you know, status active or whatever. Like, it's a data point. It's not useful. Where it becomes useful is when you combine it with structure and context, right? So by structuring your data, so then you have tables, you have columns, and by providing it with context, you end up with what we know as analytics, right? Like you have those Tableau or whatever other dashboarding solution you might want to use. But at the end of the day, to really generate value out of data, you need more than just data. You need like those other components. And that's kind of the realization that led me to see how high value the data field could be for those organizations, because there was this weird obsession with data, like the short-sighted obsession with data, that I thought we could do a lot of good in the market by kind of helping unlearn and helping like everybody gain some perspective. Because at the end of the day, when you get data, what you want to do is you want to first structure it, and that's something that's accomplished through data engineering. And you want to provide it with, again, context, which is something you do through data analytics. And because the realized value of data is always perceived through the data analytics piece of things, that's what's extremely visible, right? It's end user facing. Everybody sees, hey, so that's where the data actually comes to roost and actually, becomes useful for us. It's right here. But the truth is, if you just do that and you underinvest in the structure part, you're going to end up with what is essentially garbage data, and you're going to be generating garbage insights, right? So what we do, and then this is kind of bringing me to what we do at Infostrux, right? What we do, and where I thought we could bring the most use to the market, was by focusing on the structure part of things, where we could provide the data engineering capability that those businesses that over invested in the analytics side of things and the context side of things were lacking. And that's what we do, right? So we are a data engineering firm. We are specializing on specifically the Snowflake data platform, and we help businesses kind of take their current data strategy and bring it to the next level by addressing all of those lackings they may have on the engineering side,
Yeah,
data
yeah,
engineering side to be precise.
brilliant, brilliant explanation of what you guys do. So maybe then to take a step back, explain for the folks at home, like what is Snowflake exactly, and then tie it into context of Infostrux.
Yeah, absolutely. So much like nowadays we do cloud, so we will generally go with AWS, with GCP, with Azure. There's this new platform. Well, this new platform, it's been around for quite a few years now, but there's this emerging platform, I would say, called Snowflake, which touts itself as a data cloud. So basically, where AWS will try to be an all-purpose cloud that does basically everything, same with GCP, Azure. Snowflake kind of came into existence as something that was more akin to a data warehouse where you could, store data, and then they started kind of building and evolving around that concept to become something more. Essentially, they are trying to be something as valuable in terms of functionality as a cloud like AWS, but solely focused on data. And for example, where let's say that you're working with AWS, you would have to interface with a whole bunch of different services, which each have their own interfaces, their own APIs, their own everything. With Snowflake, everything can happen at the SQL level. So if you are a data expert and you need to manage large amounts of data and you need to manage the underlying infrastructure that comes with it, you can do everything with the language you know and love and are an expert at, right? So I was actually super interested by that concept when I first stumbled upon it. Actually, it was one of our co-founders that um, put it in front of my face and told me, "Look at that, that's pretty cool." It's it's kind of a paradigm shift where businesses are doing cloud nowadays using infrastructure as code, where everything is codified, everything is made very predictable by using code. But that's alienating a big part of the technical audience, which is data experts that have to still work with this data, and suddenly they had to kind of learn this entire new way of doing things that wasn't quite aligned with data. And now you have Snowflake that kind of gives them a way out where they can use their expertise. They don't have to relearn an entire new thing, and they can focus on what they do best.
So is it a good way to explain it is that Snowflake provides this like abstraction layer where you can connect to the cloud using a language as you know, which is SQL, but also enables you to not be locked into any particular cloud provider. So you can bounce around between a GCP, AWS, or Azure much more easily than if you're, let's say, full AWS, right? So you can use different components without being tied into one particular provider and also using it, like you said, like I mentioned with this abstraction layer. Is that a good way to represent it?
Yeah, absolutely. The idea is that now that you have this platform that uses kind of a neutral language, and that is not opinionated when it comes to what compute you're using on the cloud level, then yes, this Snowflake can be your lingua franca when you want to do data across different platforms. And nowadays, a lot of organizations, especially at the enterprise level, are going the multi-cloud route, and this is a great way to have kind of this central platform where you can store your data and you can kind of exfiltrate it throughout the different cloud platforms. Which, by the way, Snowflake's pretty good at. Snowflake can be kind of integrated to the different cloud platforms. Um, you know, Basically, it's how it works, right? Like whenever you deploy a Snowflake account, you're going to be choosing in which cloud you want it to be deployed, so it can live right next to your compute. Let's say that you have already presence in whatever GCP or AWS. Well, it can sit right next to your compute, so that the latency and all of that can be optimized.
Yeah. What do you know any really good like use cases or transformation cases of like what with Snowflake, like a public example or even one that's not public of what they've done that really kind of like enabled a company to do something cool and innovative?
I mean, there are a bunch out there. I mean, I could point you to the most visible public ones, like Capital One, for example. A bunch of large financial organizations are kind of moving in that direction. But in terms of innovative use cases, um, I don't know that I can necessarily. Yeah, I don't know that I would give you a public one per se. Oh, actually, no. There's a good one that came out recently. Um, so you know ZoomInfo, right? Which is a pretty well-known sales intelligence tool. Basically, a database where you can find everybody's emails and everybody's information, and um, their business is data. At the end of the day, their business is to make data available. And as it stands right now, if you want to use, well, as it's used to stand, if you wanted to use ZoomInfo data, you would have to extract it from their platform and then re-import it into whatever system you needed. So Snowflake, by virtue of being a cloud native technology, has implemented something called a data marketplace. So this basically allows anybody that uses Snowflake to make certain data set available for, I guess you could call it for rent, by other users of Snowflake in a way that's perfectly secure and allows them to monetize that data. So where ZoomInfo previously was limited to basically providing with a bunch of extracts or whether it be in CSV files or whatever, now they can actually expose all of their data through that data marketplace, that data exchange, and any customer of theirs that wants to use the ZoomInfo data can actually integrate at the database level as opposed to having to run through this clunky like extract methodology, and they can pay for the service right there on Snowflake's platform through the marketplace, right? So it simplifies the interaction quite a bit, and it makes the data tremendously more accessible and much easier to integrate with the rest of your data when you want to run analytics. So a lot of big businesses out there are kind of starting to consider Snowflake as being a great way to monetize this data that they're selling already anyway. And some other businesses are seeing this as an opportunity to kind of monetize some of their data sets that have traditionally been relatively locked in because they didn't have a convenient way of sharing it with customers, a convenient and secure way, I would add.
Yeah, I think there's innovation. Like I think you nailed it, right? In terms of like a fascinating case because it enables an entire new business model to appear out of nowhere, right? So that's kind of cool. Maybe a two-part question, and then I guess I think I know your opinion, but I still like to ask it. So like I think you've painted the bull case pretty well for Snowflake. Is there a bear case? Like is there a world where like a company like Snowflake that doesn't have as much traction as its like current valuation suggests, or is it that we're still so early in, let's say, the movement to the cloud that it's not realistic? Like we're in the first inning, there's still like the whole game hasn't been played yet. I'm guessing you're thinking more that front, but curious to hear you if there's any, if there is any bear case for a company like Snowflake.
Um, so yeah, definitely. I mean, they are implicitly competing with all of the big cloud vendors, right? So whenever they want to engage with the customer, there's going to be some expectation that this customer already has a cloud presence somewhere, which means that the sales team of that cloud service provider is already engaging with them. Um, what you're seeing right now is that Snowflake has a very easy time interfacing with AWS, an okay time interfacing with Azure, and a pretty bad time interfacing with GCP. And it's pretty understandable, right? Because if you look at AWS, for example, they have Redshift, which is in terms of big data, well, in terms of data warehousing, Redshift is kind of the more directly competing product to Snowflake's offering. And I mean, Redshift is it's a decent technology, but it does require a whole bunch of integrations to other services of the AWS ecosystem to become fully featured. Whereas Snowflake is much simpler of approach, and you have a lot more flexibility when it comes to it. So the competition isn't as intense there, and AWS has actually been very intelligent in how they integrate with Snowflake. There are more and more integrations coming out. Actually, I just posted about one the other day where the machine learning capabilities of the AWS platform are now integrated out of the box with Snowflake. I realize this is turning into a Snowflake sales pitch. I'm going to tone it down in a bit. But at the end of the day, AWS still has Redshift internally, right? That they can sell and they can make full margins on. And the same thing with Azure Synapse, and the same thing with GCP BigQuery. So when it comes to kind of a very obvious barricade that they have to kind of break through if they want to fully realize their traction, this is it. It's either they become extremely good at partnering with those other cloud vendors, or they become extremely good at outselling them. right? And pushing them out of the market for their specific field. And that hasn't happened just yet, right? I think that they are building their feature set and they are building their partnering abilities so that whatever works best happens, but it still hasn't happened yet, and it's a very real risk that eventually the big cloud vendors could decide to go, hey, you know what? Screw you, Snowflake, and they try to push them out. It would be unlikely, in my opinion, simply because they're like Snowflake. Ironically, Snowflake being a technology that runs on those clouds is a very important customer to those cloud providers. But yeah, like there will always be the risk of kind of infighting, leading to Snowflake's diminished traction.
Yeah, it would almost be perceived as potentially, anti-competitive if any of these big platforms that are already at such massive scale
Yeah.
decide, like the smaller company, even though Snowflake does is valued at a large amount, but it would still be perceived as anti-competitive. You mentioned that it doesn't integrate as well with GCP. So curious, I know maybe we're geeking out a bit, but like, is it because of Kubernetes and like that Google pretends to do the same thing that Snowflake does in terms of this abstraction layer, or am I reading that incorrectly?
Um, I mean, so yeah, right. Like if you look at the recent, and I say recent, like the last few years, um, Google GCP has started to put a lot of focus on their data and analytics capabilities. They are starting to make a play for multi-cloud capabilities as well, right? Like they have BigQuery Omni, I think it's called, where they can actually run a subset of their BigQuery capabilities across the different cloud vendors. So yes, there is absolutely, I think, a bigger overlap between what they're trying to do and what Snowflake's trying to do. And also, I think that in terms of sheer feature set right now, Snowflake and BigQuery are probably the most closely matched of all the technologies that the different cloud vendors have to offer. So Snowflake still has something of an edge because it's explicitly not one of the big cloud vendors. So they can actually take a little bit more of a neutral stance, and it's easier for them to interface with customers that might be working with AWS or Azure, for example. Whereas, let's say that GCP is trying to sell BigQuery Omni to, I don't know, a business that's currently all in with AWS, they're going to have a much harder time, right? Uh, but yeah, so at the end of the day, I think that's why there's so much friction between them. You can still run Snowflake in GCP, but in terms of like interfacing with the sales team and kind of working with them at the more business level, there's more friction there for sure.
Yeah. What do you think? Maybe just zoom out and talk about the industry a bit. Like, what do you think are the biggest myths in a company going to the cloud or that it's investing in the cloud? What do you think are the biggest things that are misunderstood?
Um, the myths around a company going to the cloud. So I think that one of the bigger myths is probably that it's a straightforward thing, right? Um I'm a big cloud advocate, as you might imagine, but it's too easy to just say, oh well, every single business should go to the cloud right now, and that's going to be the best solution for them because everybody's going to the cloud, and that's it, right? I think a lot of business leaders have kind of um, been tainted by this perception that everybody's going to the cloud and that's what everybody does nowadays. Um, I think that it's important to be very realistic and pragmatic when it comes to migrating. There are a ton of ways to do migrations right, um, and you really have to consider whether every single one of your workloads is worth bringing to the cloud or whether it should just live the end of its days on prem. Like there's so many considerations when it comes to choosing the right approach and whether or not to do it, that it's hard to just kind of go, boil it down to a simplistic yes or no decision. Oh well, everybody's doing it, so I should do it as well, right? So I think that's one of the big ones, and the other one is everything that has to do with cost. It's all over the place, right? Some people will say, "Oh, you're going to be saving so much on the cloud," but then some others will tell you, "Oh, well, if you move to the cloud, it's actually going to be more expensive." The real answer is somewhere in between, and at the end of the day, you have to consider the operational overhead that you're saving by moving to the cloud as one of the biggest factors that you should optimize for, as opposed to cost at all, price at all cost, or whatever I should say for that sentence to make sense.
Yeah, no, I get it. No, it totally makes sense. I think my big takeaway is that it depends. Like the thing is, there's no blanket rule for everything, but I do see that over time. Like if you do take a step back, like running your own servers will not make sense. So like I said, maybe like for now, let that thing die slowly, but by 2030 or by whatever X timeline, like having your own servers in the basement, probably not the right choice. Like I'm sure you would agree with me on that statement. Um, in terms of things that you see coming in, like because you have a lens of like kind of the future of the technology, what is coming that's maybe not well seen today? So like cool trends that are not yet in public consciousness just yet.
That's a great question. So there are two things, right? Two big ones, and both of them I've actually alluded to a little bit earlier in this conversation. But uh, the first one that comes to mind is this notion of data marketplace, so data exchanges. I think that data is becoming more and more of a commodity, and where we used to think like we it used to be kind of a, I call it a meme in the entrepreneurship community, that people would say, oh yeah, we're gonna have so much data and we'll sell it, and everybody knew that, well, yeah, you're going to sell your data, okay, but that's not a real business model, right? But I think that with this advent of the data marketplace, data exchange, like this is becoming more and more of a real possibility. You can actually build businesses around this concept of having very high value data. That was already the case, by the way. It's not a new business model altogether. It's just that it's going to be so much more facilitated that I think we're going to see a few businesses kind of come out and really put a lot of emphasis in that specialty, and they will have a lot of success, right? Like being stewards of data is going to become a thing that's very important. Um, the other thing I'm seeing is probably around multi-cloud. I fully expect multi-cloud to change its face in the coming years. I wrote an article about this. I'm very opinionated on the matter, but basically, what it boils down to is I think that the way we do multi-cloud today is wrong. I think that we're not doing it well at all, and I think that is going to change tremendously. Simply in the way that we interface with the different clouds and the different services and the different platforms. I expect to see a lot of other Snowflake-like players emerge, where they will have what is essentially a cloud, or a cloud service that's highly specific, highly focused on one single thing that they're going to do tremendously well. Um, Another example of that would be, for example, Wasabi, which is a business that is trying to compete not with AWS as a whole, but with S3, which is the AWS's storage service. And what they're doing, their promise is very simple, right? They say, oh, you know what? We are building a company that is bit compatible with the S3 API. So if you're using S3 today, you can basically just change the target of your command line, and suddenly everything's working on their infrastructure. But it's cheaper than S3. That's their entire promise, the entire point of the business. That's all they do. They compete with S3, and they're getting pretty good at it. They're getting decent traction, and they're delivering on this. And what I'm hoping to see is that more and more we'll see those specialized clouds, and then suddenly multi-cloud will be less of a contrived. Oh, let's do the same thing in three places, or oh, let's be able to kind of get back up in those other clouds, and to become more of a service composition challenge, which I think would open up so many doors in the future.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You like it becomes like almost a role in the company is like having like a chief orchestrator, where it's like you're not going to build that much stuff internally, right? Like you're not going to build your own servers anymore, right? To my previous point, but you also won't need to build all these like specialized cloud services. You'll just connect to the best one that makes the most sense,
Yeah,
instead of
exactly.
trying to like the CFO diversify risk by being running instances both on, let's say, Azure and AWS, which makes no sense, but choosing the best option for whatever microservice that you need, right? Is that a fair interpretation?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the general idea behind it. Kind of change this from a oh well, we have to do this to make sure that we won't be stuck in a bad place, and kind of bring it a little bit more into the territory of hey, we can actually make new and better things with this paradigm.
Yeah, yeah, amazing, man, amazing. Maybe a final question, Bill. Maybe to talk about going back to our topic from before investing. So, what are you excited about outside of enterprise software? Any like technologies or startups that you've been paying closer attention to?
Um, that's a good one. That's a good one. To be perfectly honest, the past few months have been very busy for me, so I don't necessarily have as much perspective as I would otherwise do.
Or maybe
Um,
another way to ask it is, what would you want to be learning about? So, because like you said, your head's down building your business.
yeah.
So, what are the areas you're like? I'm definitely on the outside looking in, but that looks interesting to me.
So actually, I've been putting a lot of brain cycles around, and this is a little bit out of left field, but I've been putting a lot of brain cycles into game design and game development. So I did do a stint in a video game studio in the past before going all in on the cloud, and there is something inherently fascinating to me when it comes to game development because what you're building is at the end of the day it's still software, right? But it's software that's so inherently artistic that I love this mix between kind of personal expression and kind of the Cartesian rigid structure that comes around building software and operating live ops. Once your game is online, and I just kind of love this dichotomy in this field. And to be perfectly transparent, I think that um, if touching wood, but if Infostrux keeps going as well as it's going right now, probably in a few years I'll probably be launching like an indie studio or something like that. I think it's such an interesting field to be evolving in.
Yeah, yeah, like we're both from Montreal. Well, at least you're originally from Magog, but like Montreal being a hub for it, right, in the gaming world, and I've only been exposed to it a little bit. It's just a fascinating space, right, where it's like now everything's kind of becoming gaming to a certain extent. So like
Yeah,
everything's becoming gamified. So it's like I find the opportunities just growing in the space, and
uh, uh, absolutely, and it's in a certain way it's also the combination of so many awesome things. Like one thing we don't think about often is that running a game, especially a game that's long lived, is essentially like it requires a lot of data analysis. It requires a lot of cloud infrastructure. It requires a lot of those things that really make me geek out in the back end, but with this additional layer of like artistic vision on top. And yeah, it's so cool.
yeah, yeah. We could keep going for a while, man, but I be respectful of your time. Maybe final question is, where can people reach out, connect with you, learn more about what you guys are doing in InfoStrux?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, people, of course, can find us at infostrux.com. They can find me on LinkedIn, Pierre Jr Cliche, PJCLICHE on Twitter. And yeah, that's about it for me.
Cool, Pierre, c'était un plaisir.
Pareillement.